She says, good choice. Yeah, we've got great prime rib today, sir. Yeah, that's a good choice. So we're constantly being encouraged, really, in our culture, typically, and at every step of the way, to eat happy meals. Like McDonald's says, well, the burgers grow on a burger patch. Like you just pick them off a tree like it's an apple or something. It's totally disconnected and covered up. So this is the situation that we find ourselves in, is this disconnectedness from the actual realities that we're engaged in. And so to kill 75 million animals every single day for food, we have whole armies of people that have to do that work for us. And these are the people that have the highest rates of drug addiction and suicide and alcohol abuse and spousal abuse and work-related injuries, slaughterhouse workers and factory farm workers. And so when I go to the store and I just buy a piece of flesh that looks so innocent, right? It's just this wrapped up in styrofoam, or go and buy a burger or some cheese or whatever it is, we don't realize not only what the animal went through, but what the workers actually go through, because they go home very often and do in their communities what they do to the animals. It just, if you read the book Slaughterhouse, for example, by Gail Eisner, I actually talked to some in the World Peace Diet too, to understand this. And so, as Martin Luther King said, violence anywhere harms everyone everywhere, because we're all interconnected. And as Madeline also reminds us, compassion anywhere helps everyone everywhere, because we're all interconnected. So the thing to remember is, each one of us, whether anyone sees us or not, that when we engage in behavior that is based in kindness and mercy and tenderness and gentleness, we are helping everyone everywhere, because we're all interconnected. The fundamental teaching really in all of this also is that the interconnectedness of all life. The idea of being a fundamentally separate self is the grand illusion. When we quiet our mind enough, we will see that there is one life flowing through all appearances. And as we understand that, we naturally realize that our greatest happiness comes in blessing others and in finding the unique blessing we can give to others. And that is the transformation that I think our culture is yearning for, but the foundation of it has to be the food. Because the harm that we're meeting out with our food choices is incredibly vast and complex. The main bulk of the book in the World Peace Diet, really a lot of it, goes into just looking at the ramifications of our food choices. I think this is the most exciting adventure anyone in our culture can go on today. I mean, looking into the ramifications of our food choices is an exercise in real amazement, because we see this vast system of food it reaches its tentacles literally everywhere, into every dimension of our earth, into every dimension of our inner consciousness, of our shared reality together, our myths and stories and movies and books and art and everything. Food is the most powerful connection we have to the earth, the most intimate connection we have with the natural order, and the most intimate and powerful connection we have with our culture. And every culture understands this, but this is, if you want to look deeply and understand any culture, anthropologists know the best way to do that is to look at their food. And so if we look at the food in our culture, how many of you have done that? How many of you have actually looked behind the curtain and looked at the food system? Some of you, I'm sure some of you have, because look at you here. Yeah. How many of you just never raise your hand no matter what? So, but anyway, this is the thing. It's like looking deeply into our food choices. And what we'll see, really, is that the way we're, in a sense, indoctrinated into eating animal foods from the time we're little kids, like I said earlier, it plants in us at a very deep level, I would say roughly 7 mentalities, 7 basic ways of thinking and being that are, I think, hallmarks of our culture, that allow us to continue every single day to kill 75 million animals a day. And very briefly, these 7 are, number 1 is reductionism, learning to simply reduce a being to a thing. So I learned early on to see, when I see a dog, I always say a being, especially if it's, Buster or wherever he is, we pet and love, but then we turn over here and we stab and kill, and we don't really see the amazing disconnect there. So reducing beings to things, commodification of life is connected with that, seeing beings as merely commodities that we buy and sell. Another one is exclusion, learning early on to simply exclude other beings from the sphere of our compassion. We just block them out, not included. So what veganism is, I should say here, is actually what it is. It's nothing to be proud of. It's no, even though I think it's a great accomplishment, but it's not being any better than anyone. It's simply coming home back into our heart and looking with eyes that when we see a being, rather than seeing a thing. It's coming home to our native wisdom and compassion, our true nature. And it's, I think, it's also what veganism is simply a mentality of radical inclusion, that we're not going to any longer exclude others from the sphere of our compassion. So those are two, and then a third one is a mentality of predation. We're taught early on, so that, again, sort of a hidden teaching, but we're given the flesh of animals that have been attacked and stabbed. You know, herding is basically a perverse form of hunting, where the animals are just, you know, stuck there in a cage, and then you just take them out and stab them, kill them, and eat them. And so we're given the flesh of these animals that have been attacked and stabbed. So the underlying message is we're predatory. You know, and you think about what a predator is. A predatory mentality is the exact opposite of the mentality that is encouraged by every religious tradition. For example, in the Buddhist tradition, it's like this in any tradition. The ideal is the bodhisattva ideal. The ideal of the bodhisattva is someone who lives their life to bless others. You know, the idea is that the more I can bless others, the happier they will be, the happier I will be, and the more I will awaken spiritually. The predatory mentality is, well, how can I harm another for my own benefit? It's the exact opposite. And yet we wonder why we have a predatory economic system, or we have a tiny minority that's literally preying on everyone. We're encouraged to compete with each other and prey upon each other, and to prey upon the weaknesses of others, and to manipulate others as instruments and to use them. We're eating at it every meal. That's the subtext of every meal. So how can we expect we'll ever create a culture of fairness and equity and justice if the underlying message is might makes right? Whoever has the power makes the rules. That's Howard Lang said that's the real golden rule in Congress. Those who have the gold make the rules. So the idea is to understand this. So, and then I think we're up to number 4. Another one of these essential mentalities is the mentality of privilege and elitism. Again, the subtext of every meal is that certain beings are superior to others. The ones who are superior get to use the ones who are inferior, however they want. So again, how are we going to create a culture of equality when this is the subtext of every single meal? And we see this played out, and we don't question it because it's uncomfortable to question it, actually, for most people, because it causes cognitive dissonance, because we're all believe something and act in ways that are actually against our own values. So if we walk into the room and we're vegans, and then people know it, automatically they're feeling threatened. How many of you have noticed that? People seem threatened all of a sudden. I didn't even say anything. They're already yelling at me. So I think we've got to realize that just by being and acting in integrity with our own values, we are transforming others around us. We're planting seeds that are actually, even though people will say, don't do it, I don't want to hear, don't tell me. I say to people, would you like to know where your bacon comes from? No, I don't want to know where your bacon comes from. I wouldn't be able to enjoy it anymore, don't tell me. Because I don't want to know. And yet this being afraid of knowing is really the hallmark of cognitive dissonance, and the hallmark of denial, and the hallmark of disconnectedness. And that's another one of the mentalities, the mentality of denial and disconnectedness. We learn early on to disconnect the reality that's on our plate from the reality that it took to get on our plate. We use all these euphemisms, right? My mother said, oh, we're having bacon this morning. She didn't say, well, we're having the flesh of a tortured animal this morning. I would have said, wait a minute, I don't know if I want to have that this morning. So we don't call things by their true names like the Taoists say we should do. We should call things by their true names if we want to really understand what we're doing. And then finally, the other main part of this mentality that we're injected with that I think is very important to contemplate and be aware of is that it is essentially a mentality of the domination and suppression of the feminine principle, which it lives, I think, in all human beings, whether we're male or female. We have this inner feminine principle that I refer to in World Peace Diet as Sophia. Sophia is the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom, and I think that Sophia is that dimension of ourselves that yearns to protect life and celebrate life, that takes care of the kids and the babies, that takes care of the earth, that takes care of things. But when you feed little kids the flesh and secretions of animals, it just without saying anything about it, when they find out, they have to repress Sophia. They have to put it down, not care, not know. And so that works really well if you want to have a culture where the people are mindless consumers, where they're afraid to look deeply, where they'll do whatever they're told, where they'll be willing slaves in a system that's run by a few wealthy people. It's the perfect system. You just get people to enslave animals and they will be willing slaves themselves, because when we steal the purposes of others, what's going to happen to us? As we sow, so shall we reap. So we steal the purposes of billions of animals. We say, you don't have a purpose. Your purpose is my purpose. Your purpose is to give me milk and eggs and your life and your flesh and your blood. And so when we do that, we lose our own purpose. And that's what I think when we look out into our culture, we see a culture in many ways that has lost its purpose at a very deep level. We think our purpose is to consume. That we'll be happy if we, and fulfilled if we can just buy the right combination of products at Walmart and eat the right foods and have the right things. You know, so this is the underlying driving force in all of this. What we have to see is the mentality required in eating animal foods. And so the World Peace Diet, to me essentially is not, besides being a book, it's a way of eating founded on ethically eating a plant-based diet that's organically grown in whole foods, for, like I say, for ethical reasons. And the wonderful side effect of that is we'll find that we get physically, I think, at least as healthy and probably a lot more healthy than people who are eating for sure, the standard American diet. So in the World Peace Diet, in the book, I talk a little bit about the power of food. I go into the history of this, which I'll just say just very briefly here, because I think it's very fascinating to look, because we think typically that what we're doing is natural. It's been happening for millions of years, or a long time. This is what people say all the time, oh, this is natural. Well, when we look at it, we see that people never started owning animals as property for food until about 8,000 or 10,000 years, say 10,000 years ago, in what is today Iraq. People started owning animals as property, and that's called herding. And I think when that happened, that was the last revolution our culture ever experienced. And when that happened, everything changed. And basically, people started to eventually, it took a long time, many generations, but eventually, it was a sense of reducing animals from mysterious and powerful cohabitants of the world with us to mere property. We reduce the other animals to mere predators, pests, basically. Get rid of the wolves and coyotes and prairie dogs because they might mess with our capital. The word capital means head, as in head of livestock. So we have the arising of capitalism as a wealthy class owning the means of production. The proto-capitalists that arose back in the eastern Mediterranean region basically grew to control the entire culture at that time. We had the arising of war. There had never been war before on the planet. The very first word for war that we know of is the ancient Sanskrit word gavya, which means the desire for more cows. Because what they realized is as they started owning cows, first it was sheep and then goats. They were wild, but they needed, you're not wild anymore, you're my property, and they started confining them and owning them as property. That they could get rich very fast if they would, because these were wealth, animals were wealth. The more goats and sheep you had, the wealthier you were, that was money. If they attacked someone else who had a bunch of sheep and goats and won, they would get all that wealth. And it was also the beginning, not just of war, but of slavery, because whoever lost the war, they would become the property, like the animals, of those who won the war. And so they would become concubines and become sexual slaves, and the men would be castrated like they did the animals and become worker slaves. And we had the arising gradually in the Eastern Mediterranean of extremely bellicose culture that spread throughout the Northern Mediterranean, spread up into Europe and Central Asia, and came over here. And as I say, it's still spreading throughout the planet right now. We see it spreading through Monsanto and Cargill and ConAgra and McDonald's and Burger King and the whole, as I said earlier, military, industrial, medical, pharmaceutical, media complex. It is so vast, and it is spreading. And yet we see also, I think, at the same time, the arising of an awakening humanity that says, wait a minute, 10,000 years is enough here, and it's time for us to remember that there's another kind of agriculture. Animal agriculture from the very beginning was done by men, and it required men to become hard and tough and disconnected because the animals did not want to go along with this. They did not want to be castrated. They did not want to be raped against their will. They did not want to have their babies stolen. They did not want to be confined. They did not want to be killed. So we just always, like I saw on that farm up in Vermont, we just overcome them with brute force and intellectual force and trick them and manipulate them. And you couldn't have factory farming without very powerful scientific drugs and other things. And so this whole domination mentality over nature, this is really what creates. And today, unfortunately, we do plant agriculture the way we do animal agriculture. Like we say with Monsanto, we have these monocrop fields where we just douse them with chemicals, we kill everything else off. But in the beginning, and it's still possible, people still today, we can do plant agriculture the way it really, I think, calls to be done, which is essentially, it was always more feminine work, and it has to do with nurturing, working with the cycles of nature, with the cycles of life. You plant one seed, you get 10,000. Everything, it's just this wonderful abundance of nature, and we can easily feed everyone on a fraction of the land right now. I mean, that's the truth. This is being discovered absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt. Organic, veganic gardening is incredibly, you get an enormous amount of food out of a small piece of land when you do it right. So there's really, the beauty in this message, I guess, that I want to emphasize here as we begin to wrap it up, is that we have the possibility on this planet, really there's nothing holding us back except the inertia and the habits, but there's nothing stopping us from feeding everyone, from creating a culture of peace and harmony and freedom and sustainability and justice and equality. There's nothing stopping us except this driving force of eating animal foods and the mentality required by the animal foods. So, see, this is the thing. Eating animal foods is not only on the outer level the most devastating thing we can do culturally, it's a driving force behind environmental devastation and war and injustice and the military-industrial killing machine that concentrates wealth in the hands of a few. But on a deeper level, the inner level, it's what causes the inner spiritual and mental and emotional driving force that keeps the whole, that feeds the whole thing. That's why going vegan is so important. To do it not just for our health. I mean, I think it's great if you're starting out, you know that you will be healthier if you're not eating animal foods. But to understand that by moving toward a plant-based diet for ethical reasons is actually an inner transformation that takes place at a really, I would say, a spiritual, emotional, and psychological level, where we become healthier on that level, and we begin to become a force for the healing of our world. We begin to become a force for the positive evolution of our culture. And when that happens, we begin, I think, to see the bigger picture. And so I've gone through 2 chapters out of 15 in the World Peace Diet up to now. So I'm going to spare you, because one of the things I always like to remember is that as vegans,